My son-in-law shoved me into the wall of my own workshop and told me I was finished. 3 days later, I cooked him the best meal of his life. He smiled and said, "See, you finally understand your place." He didn't know who was sitting in the car at the end of the driveway. If you have ever poured everything you had into a family that treated you like an obstacle, this story is for you. Please hit the like button and subscribe to Revenge Saga to follow this old man's journey. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. I am 68 years old. My name is Walter Marsh, and I have been building things with my hands since I was 12 years old. Standing on a step stool in my father's garage in Knoxville, learning how to read the grain of a piece of oak before you cut it. You have to understand the wood first. You have to understand what it wants to become. I spent 40 years applying that same philosophy to Marsh Custom Woodworks, a furniture company I built out of a 2-car garage in Franklin, Tennessee, into a business with 23 employees, a showroom on Highway 96, and contracts with hotels from here to Atlanta. I built all of it with these hands, with sawdust in my lungs and calluses that never fully healed. My wife Diane passed 6 years ago, breast cancer. She fought it for 3 years with more grace than I have ever seen in any human being, and when she was gone, the house felt like a building someone had removed all the load-bearing walls from. Still standing, but you could feel it wanting to fall. My daughter Claire is the best thing I ever made. Not the furniture, not the business. Claire, she has her mother's laugh and her mother's stubbornness, and for 34 years, she has been the reason I kept the lights on when I didn't feel like it. 3 years ago, she married Derek Holt. I want to be careful here, because I know how these stories go. People expect me to say I hated him from the start, that I saw the snake in the garden on day one. But that is not true. Derek was charming in the way that expensive cars are charming before you find out the engine burns oil. He had a firm handshake and a big smile, and he always remembered to call me sir in front of other people. He was a sales consultant, whatever that means, and he wore his confidence the way some men wear cologne. Too much, and in the wrong places. The first time I noticed something was wrong was about 8 months after the wedding. Claire called me on a Tuesday night, which was unusual. We had a Sunday dinner tradition, but Tuesdays were hers and Derek's. She sounded stretched thin, the way a wire sounds just before it snaps. I asked her if everything was okay, and she said, "Dad, Derek thinks you should consider bringing him into the business." As a partner, I remember sitting in my workshop, a half-finished rocking chair in the corner, holding the phone and saying nothing for a long moment. "He has some ideas," she added. "He thinks the company has a lot of untapped potential." I told her we would talk Sunday. Derek's ideas, as it turned out, were mostly about spending my money faster than I was earning it. He wanted to expand into commercial contracts for office furniture, which requires entirely different machinery, entirely different supply chains, and an entirely different workforce. He had a business plan printed on glossy paper, and he presented it at my kitchen table like a man pitching a television network. The numbers were impressive, the way magic tricks are impressive. They assumed things that were not true and ignored things that were. I told him no. Politely. The way you tell a salesman you're not interested without closing the door all the way. That was 8 months before he shoved me into a wall. For those 8 months, Derek worked at the company, not as a partner. I never signed anything giving him that, but as a sales and marketing coordinator, a position I created because Claire asked me to give him a chance, and because I thought work might sand down some of his rough edges. Instead, it gave him access. Access to the accounts, access to the vendor relationships, access to the quiet machinery of a business I had built one contract at a time. I should have been watching more carefully, but I was 68 years old and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. And I trusted my daughter. And I thought that trusting my daughter meant trusting the man she chose. I was wrong about the last part. The night everything broke open started the way bad nights often do, quietly. I had come in from the workshop around 7 in the evening. Claire and Derek were at the house for dinner, which had become more frequent in recent months. There was always a reason. The apartment lease was complicated. The area was noisy. It was easier to park. I had been cooking. A pot of chicken stew, Diane's recipe. The one she made every November. The kitchen smelled like thyme and bay leaf and something close to safety. I walked through the back door, and Derek was sitting at my desk in the study. My desk. He had the filing cabinet open and a stack of papers spread out in front of him, and he was taking photographs of them with his phone. I stood in the doorway and said his name. He startled, but the shame lasted about half a second before the confidence came back like a reflex. He stood up and set his phone face down on the desk with the practiced ease of a man who had done this before. "Walter," he said, "I was looking for the Hendricks invoice. I needed the contact number." "The Hendricks account is managed through the office system," I said, "not the home filing cabinet." He smiled. "I know. I just thought since I was here." I walked to the desk. I picked up the papers he had been photographing. They were partnership documents. Documents that had been drafted by my attorney 2 years ago when I had briefly considered bringing my nephew into the business before he moved to Portland. Documents that named a 50% equity stake. Documents that had never been signed. "These were in a locked drawer," I said. "Walter, I can explain. Where is the key?" The smile finally dropped. He came around the desk toward me, and his energy had shifted. The salesman was gone. What replaced him was something harder and less patient. "Look," he said, lowering his voice the way men do when they want to sound reasonable while doing something that isn't. "I have been working at that company for 8 months. I have brought in 3 new accounts. The Bartlett contract alone was worth $40,000. And you know that. I deserve to be compensated properly." "You are compensated properly," I said. "You have a salary." "I deserve equity," he said. "And Claire agrees with me." "Don't you, Claire?" I had not noticed Claire standing in the doorway. She was leaning against the frame with her arms crossed, and she looked like a woman standing in the middle of a road, watching 2 cars approach from opposite directions. She opened her mouth and then closed it again. "Claire," I said, "did you know he was in my files?" She looked at the floor. That was my answer. Derek stepped closer to me. He was taller than me by 3 inches and younger by 30 years, and he used both of those things without using either of them, if you understand what I mean. He didn't touch me yet. He just positioned himself in a way that was meant to remind me of the difference. "Here is what is going to happen," he said. "You are going to add me as a 49% partner, documented and filed. Or I am going to walk Claire out of here tonight, and you are going to be alone in this house with your pot of soup and your 40-year-old sawdust, and you are not going to see your grandchildren." Grandchildren. Ellie was 8 years old. She was their daughter and my reason for most things. "I want you to leave," I said. He laughed, short and contemptuous. "You need to think about your future, old man. You need to—" I turned toward the door. I was not going to continue this conversation. That was when his hand hit my shoulder from behind, hard enough to send me into the wall beside the bookcase. My shoulder hit the corner of the shelf, and I felt the pain flare down my arm, sharp and bright. A framed photo of Diane fell off the shelf. The glass cracked down the middle. The room went silent. I looked at the photo on the floor. I looked at my wife's face split by a crack in the glass. I looked at my daughter, who was frozen in the doorway with her hand over her mouth. Then I looked at Derek, who had gone very still. The way people go still after doing something they cannot take back. I bent down slowly and picked up the photo. I held it in both hands. The crack ran right through the center of Diane's smile. "Get out of my house," I said. My voice was very quiet. "Both of you." Claire said, "Dad, take Ellie from school tomorrow as usual," I said. "She stays with me on Wednesdays. That does not change." I set the photo on the desk carefully. "But right now, I need you to leave." Derek looked like he wanted to say something else, something that would reassert the version of events where he had the upper hand. But Claire was already moving, gathering her purse, reaching for her coat. And he followed her because that was what he did when a room stopped working in his favor. The door closed. I stood in the study for a long time. The chicken stew was still simmering in the kitchen. Outside, I heard the car start and pull out of the driveway. I sat down at my desk. The filing cabinet was still open. I looked at the partnership documents, and then I picked up my phone and called the only man in the world I trusted completely. "Frank," I said, "I need you to pull every document connected to the business. Vendor contracts, payroll, bank accounts, all of it. I need to know what Derek has touched. Frank Osgood had been my attorney for 22 years. He was 71, semi-retired, and still sharp enough to cut through anything. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How bad do you think it is?" "I think he was photographing unsigned equity documents," I said. "I think he has had 8 months of access to my accounts. I think I have been looking the wrong direction." Frank was quiet again. "I'll make some calls tonight," he said. "Walter, don't do anything yet. Don't confront him. Don't change the passwords. Don't freeze anything. If he thinks you're onto him, he'll move fast." "I know," I said. "I mean it. You have to go slow." I looked at the cracked photo of Diane. "I can go slow," I said. "I've been a carpenter for 50 years. I know how to take my time before I cut." The next morning I drove to the shop at 5, like always. I told the foreman, a good man named Ray who had been with me for 16 years, that I needed an audit of all the inventory orders from the past 8 months. Just a routine check. Ray looked at me with the eyes of a man who has worked for someone long enough to know when routine isn't routine, but he nodded and said he'd have it ready by Thursday. I drove home and waited for Frank to call. He called at noon. "Sit down, Walter." I was already sitting. "Tell me." "He opened a vendor account 8 months ago," Frank said. "A supplier called Tennessee Premium Hardwoods. Your office started ordering from them in February. Mahogany, cherry, white oak, good quality, slightly above market price. I don't recognize that vendor." "You shouldn't." The company was registered in Delaware in January, 2 weeks before Derek officially started at the shop. Frank paused. "The authorized representative of Tennessee Premium Hardwoods is a man named Michael Holt, Derek's brother." The numbers Frank read me were not enormous compared to what Monica had stolen in the video. I reminded myself that this was my life, not a story. But they were significant. Over 8 months, the shop had paid Tennessee Premium Hardwoods $67,000 in inflated invoices. A kickback scheme, old as business itself. Derek created a fake vendor, started placing orders through the company. His brother pocketed the markup, and they split it. $67,000 of Diane's legacy. Of 40 years of early mornings and sawdust and skipped vacations. "That's not all," Frank said. "Of course it isn't. I had a friend run a background check on Derek Holt. He has done this before. He was let go from a marketing firm in Charlotte 2 years ago, right before he moved to Nashville. They didn't press charges because it was cheaper to let him go. But the pattern is the same. Vendor fraud. Small enough to hide, big enough to matter." I closed my eyes. Claire had met him 4 months after he left Charlotte. She didn't know. She couldn't know. The Derek she married was a performance, and she had bought a ticket without knowing it was theater. "Frank," I said, "I need to do this right. Not just the money. I want this closed permanently." Define closed. I want him out of the company, out of the house, and unable to do this to anyone else. Frank was quiet for a moment. "Then we need a few more days, and we need to let him feel safe." "Can you do that?" The bruise on my shoulder was starting to purple. I reached up and pressed my thumb into it, feeling the deep ache. "Call me when you're ready," I said. The hardest part of the next 3 days was Wednesday. Ellie came to my workshop after school, the way she did every week. She was 8 years old and already precise the way her mother was precise, with her grandmother's eyes and a very serious opinion about which wood smelled best. She always voted for cedar. She said it smelled like Christmas. I was at the workbench sanding a cabinet door when I heard her sneakers on the concrete floor. She climbed up onto the tall stool beside me without being asked, and watched my hands for a moment the way she always did, like she was studying a language. "Grandpa," she said. "Hey, Bug." She was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "Daddy says you are going to give him the company." I set down the sanding block. I looked at her face. She was not asking to be difficult. She was 8. She was just reporting the weather and the world she lived in. "Did he say that?" She nodded. "He said once he has the papers signed, everything is going to be better. He said you've been keeping things from the family." She looked at her hands in her lap. "He said you don't trust us." I turned back to the cabinet door. I ran my palm over the wood slowly. It was smooth now. "Ready, Ellie," I said. "Do you know why I sand the wood even after it already looks smooth? She thought about it. Because there are still rough parts you can't see? That's right. You have to keep going until what you feel matches what it looks like. Until the inside and the outside are telling the same story. I looked at her. Your daddy and I are going to sort things out this weekend. I'm going to invite him to the shop for a meeting on Saturday. I want to show him the full picture of the business. Make things official. Her face relaxed. So it'll be okay? It's going to be very clear, I said. I promise. She slid off the stool and wrapped her arms around my waist. I held on for a moment longer than she expected. I pressed my chin to the top of her head and breathed in cedar and something like bubble gum. That night I called Frank again. Saturday, I said. The shop. Invite whoever needs to be there. I did not sleep well Thursday or Friday. I lay in the dark in a bedroom that still had Diane's reading lamp on her side of the bed, the one I had never moved, and I had the kind of conversations with her that you can only have in your head in the dark. I told her what I was about to do. I told her I was sorry I had let it get this far. I told her about Ellie on the stool in the workshop, about the cedar comment, about the sanding. I told her that whatever happened Saturday, Ellie was staying. I got up at 4:30. I drove to the shop before dawn. I unlocked the front bay door and stood in the middle of the floor for a while in the dark, listening to the building settle, smelling the wood and the oil and the faint tang of varnish. 40 years of my life lived in a smell. I turned on the lights and went to work. I prepped the conference table at the back of the showroom, not the one in the office. The big one, the one I had built myself out of a single slab of walnut 14 years ago. Diane had said it was the most beautiful thing I had ever made. It seated 12. I set it for 4. I called Derek at 8 that morning and told him I had thought carefully about the partnership proposal and that I was ready to move forward. I told him I wanted to do it right, with the attorney present and all the documentation in order. I told him to come to the shop at 2 o'clock on Saturday and to plan on this being a real signing ceremony, the way a real transfer of equity deserved. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice before he even finished responding. It was the sound of a man who believed he had won. Should I bring champagne? He said. Bring whatever you like, I told him. Claire texted me an hour later. Dad, thank you. This means so much. I know this wasn't easy. I read it twice. I wrote back, see you Saturday. Bring Ellie. Frank arrived at 1:15 with a woman I did not recognize. She was about 50, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a very precise handshake. Her name was Helen Carr. She was an investigator with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit. Frank had gone above the local level deliberately. Vendor fraud with an organized multi-state element, he explained, citing the Delaware Incorporation and Derek's history in Charlotte, qualified the case for state-level jurisdiction. Helen Carr did not sit down right away. She walked around the showroom for a moment, looking at the furniture the way people sometimes do when they are actually seeing it for the first time. She ran her hand along the edge of a credenza near the window. You made all of this? She asked. Most of it, I said. She nodded slowly. Then she sat down at the walnut table and opened her briefcase. Derek arrived at 2:03 with Claire a step behind him, and Ellie holding Claire's hand. He was dressed the way he dressed for important occasions. Dark jacket, open collar, the costume of a man who has learned that looking expensive is 90% of the job. He was carrying a bottle of Moet. He saw Helen Carr and Frank, and the expression on his face did something complicated in about half a second. He reassembled the confidence fast, the way a poker player reassembles a neutral face. But I had been watching Woodflex under pressure for 40 years. I saw the grain shift. Walter, he said, extending his hand. Good to see you came around. I shook it. Sit down, Derek. Let's talk about the business. Claire settled Ellie in the corner of the showroom with a sketch pad I kept for when she visited. Ellie liked to draw the furniture. She had about 30 sketches of different pieces pinned to her bedroom wall, each one labeled in careful handwriting with the wood type and the date. My daughter looked at the table, at Frank, at Helen, and I saw the first real uncertainty cross her face. Dad, she said quietly. Who is... Sit down, sweetheart, I said. Please. She sat. Derek was already seated, leaning back slightly, arms loose. the posture of a man waiting to sign documents that are in his favor. Helen Carr opened a folder and placed it in the center of the table. "Mr. Holt," she said, "my name is Helen Carr. I am an investigator with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. I want to walk you through some vendor activity associated with Marsh Custom Woodworks over the past 8 months. The looseness in Derek's posture was gone in an instant. He sat forward, his jaw tightened. He looked at me, and there was something behind his eyes that had not been there before. Something small and fast and frightened. "What is this?" he said. "Walter, what is this?" "It's a conversation," I said. "We're just talking." Helen turned the folder toward him. The top page was a printout of the Tennessee Premium Hardwoods Incorporation documents. Derek's brother's name was visible at the top. Derek looked at it and looked away. "These are business records for a vendor company registered in Delaware in January of this year," Helen said. "2 weeks before you began working at Marsh Custom Woodworks. Over 8 months, this company billed Marsh Custom Woodworks $67,400 in hardwood supply orders. The market value of those materials was approximately $41,000. The overpayment, which was transferred via your company's accounts payable system to a bank account controlled by Michael Holt, totals $26,000. Michael is a legitimate supplier," Derek said. His voice was too fast. "I introduced them because I had a prior relationship. There is nothing wrong with the materials were real," Helen said. "The fraud is in the pricing structure. You set the invoices, Mr. Holt. You approved the vendor. You bypassed the standard bidding process, and the markup benefited your brother directly." She turned another page. "We also have text messages recovered from a subpoena served to your carrier earlier this week. Messages between you and your brother discussing, and I'm quoting here, the Marsh account, and the phrase splitting at 40-60. Messages dating back to December, 6 weeks before you started the job." Claire made a sound. It was small, like a word she had started, and then decided not to finish. She was staring at the table. Derek turned to her. He turned to her first, not to me. That told me everything about their marriage that I needed to know. "Claire," he said, his voice shifting into something softer and more urgent. "Listen to me. This is being misrepresented. I was trying to build something for us, for our family. Your father was never going to give us a fair shot, and I found a way to—" "You stole from my father," Claire said. She said it quietly and precisely, the way her mother used to say things that she had thought through all the way to the end. Derek opened his mouth. "You put your hand on him," she said. "You put your hand on my father." The room was quiet. In the corner, Ellie had stopped drawing. She was watching with the careful attention of a child who understands more than adults expect. I looked at Derek. I was not angry anymore. The anger had finished burning sometime around Thursday morning when I was up at 4:30 talking to Diane in the dark. What was left was something cleaner and harder and very certain. "Derek," I said, "I am not going to press charges for the assault. I have thought about that and decided it doesn't serve anyone. But the financial fraud is not my call to make. You stole from a registered business. That is between you and the state of Tennessee." Helen Carr was already sliding a second document across the table. "Mr. Holt, this is a notice of charges. Theft by fraud over $10,000, which is a Class C felony in Tennessee. You have the right to an attorney. I would suggest you call one today." Derek stood up. He was trying to project control, but his hands were flat on the table, and his weight was forward. And it looked like a man trying not to fall. He looked at me one more time with a kind of disbelief, the look of someone who had calculated everything and missed the most important variable. "You would really do this to your daughter?" he said. "To Ellie?" I stood up. I was not tall, and I was not young, but I had the posture of a man who has stood on scaffolding in 40-mile-an-hour wind. "I am doing this for my daughter," I said, "and I am doing this for Ellie, because she deserves to grow up knowing that the people who are supposed to protect her actually do." He looked at Claire one more time. She did not look back at him. He picked up the champagne bottle from where he had set it on the edge of the table. For a second I thought he was going to throw it, but he just held it for a moment, and then set it back down carefully, and walked to the door. Helen Carr followed him out. I heard their voices in the parking lot, low and official. The showroom was quiet. The afternoon light came through the front windows and fell across the walnut table, and I could see every detail of the grain, the river of wood running through the slab, 40 or 50 years of growth made visible by the cut. Claire had not moved. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, and she was crying the way adults cry when they are trying not to. The controlled kind that takes more effort than the other kind. I walked around the table and sat down next to her. I did not say anything for a while. I put my hand over hers. "I should have seen it," she said. "You saw what he wanted you to see," I said. "That is not the same thing." I defended him. "To you. I told you he just wanted to help. I know you did. And I know you believed it." She turned to look at me and she had Diane's eyes. The exact shade, the exact particular way of looking at something straight on without flinching. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now the legal process does what it does," I said. "I have already talked to a family attorney about your situation. You have options, Claire. Good ones." She nodded slowly. Then she looked over at the corner. Ellie had put down the sketch pad and was sitting very still, watching us. "Mama?" she said. Claire wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Come here, baby." Ellie crossed the showroom floor and climbed into her mother's lap. She looked at me over her mother's shoulder with those careful eyes. Then she reached over and patted my hand with her small one. "Grandpa," she said, "is the rough part done now?" I looked at her. I thought about what I had said to her 2 days ago at the workbench. I thought about sanding until what you feel matches what it looks like. "The rough part is done," I said. She seemed to accept that completely and put her head against her mother's shoulder. Claire held her and I sat with my hand still resting on the table I had built, feeling the grain under my palm, smooth and honest and permanent. That was 8 months ago. Marsh Custom Woodworks is under my name again, fully, without any ambiguity. Ray is still the foreman. We hired 2 new craftsmen in September, a young woman named Priya who does inlay work I genuinely cannot match, and a veteran named Louie who has hands like mine. We finished a contract for a hotel in Chattanooga last month. 12 custom headboards, solid white oak, hand-planed. They called it the best furniture installation they had ever received. Derek pled guilty to the fraud charge in October to avoid trial. He was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory restitution of $26,000, and a permanent civil judgment that will follow him through any future employment. His brother Michael is being separately prosecuted. They are not speaking to each other, according to Frank, who hears things. Claire filed for divorce the week after the shop meeting. She and Ellie moved into a house 10 minutes from me in March. It is a small house with a big backyard and a magnolia tree that Ellie has already claimed as her personal headquarters. Claire is working at an interior design firm downtown, a career she had put on hold because Derek said the timing wasn't right. The timing, it turns out, is fine. Every Wednesday, Ellie comes to the shop. She has her own small workbench now, her own set of child-sized chisels that I ordered from a supplier in Vermont. She is making a jewelry box. She has been working on it for 6 weeks. She changes her mind about the finish every other day. Last Wednesday, she looked up from the box and said, "Grandpa, do you think Daddy is sorry?" I kept my eyes on the piece I was working on. "I think he is sorry about the consequences," I said. "Whether he is sorry about what he did to us, I don't know yet. That takes longer." She thought about that for a while. Then she said, "Mom says people can change if they decide to. Your mom is right about most things. Do you think he decided?" I set down my tool. I turned and looked at my granddaughter, this 8-year-old person who had watched her family fracture and was sitting here at a workbench, asking the hardest questions like they were perfectly reasonable things to wonder about, which I suppose they are. "Give it time, Bug," I said. "Some things you have to let cure before you test them." She nodded seriously. She understood curing. She knew you couldn't rush a finish. I poured myself coffee from the thermos I bring every morning. I stood at the bay window and looked out at the parking lot, at the old hickory tree, at the edge of the property that has been there longer than the building, longer than me. The leaves were going gold. I have had people ask me, since all of this happened, whether I feel guilty, whether I wish I had handled it differently, whether some part of me wishes I had just given Derek the partnership and kept the peace. The answer is no. Not because I don't believe in peace. I believe in it more than almost anything, But peace that is purchased by swallowing your dignity is not peace. It is just a slow rot that you learn to stop noticing. I spent 40 years building things designed to last 100 years, things built right the first time with the right materials and the right joinery. Because I knew that shortcuts always show up eventually. In the wood, in a family, in a man. The most important thing I can leave Ellie is not the business. It is not the walnut table, or the house, or the savings account I have set aside for her education. It is the understanding that her grandfather was a man who could be knocked into a wall and still wait, still think, still act with precision, instead of rage. That dignity is not something someone else can take from you unless you let them. And that real justice does not announce itself. It just arrives, quietly, on a Saturday afternoon in a room full of good wood and honest light. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Have you ever had to make a decision that felt like losing in order to finally win? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe to Revenge Saga so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for being here with this old man. It means more than you know.